It's my great pleasure to welcome you here today and to welcome those who are watching around the world as we honor 4 extraordinary alumni with the Harvard Kenneth C. Griffin Graduate School of Arts and Sciences Centennial Medal. The Centennial Medal was first awarded in June 1989 on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the designation of the Graduate School of Harvard University. At that time, 7 medals were awarded. Since then, approximately 4 alumni have been awarded medals each year on the day before Harvard's commencement. The medal is awarded for contributions to society as they have emerged from one's graduate education at Harvard. The symbolism incorporated into the design of the medal reflects both the institution and the basis of the award. The obverse side of the medal is dominated by a figure pouring water from 2 bowls. The figure is the handmaiden of truth. The 2 bowls represent the source of all potentialities in existence. The reverse side of the medal shows palm and laurel branches. The palm branch has traditionally symbolized both the celebration of victory after a long struggle, as well as the legendary production of the palm tree that flourished during a long life and bears fruit in older age. The laurel branch symbolizes triumph and learning. I'd like to recognize the Graduate School Alumni Association Council, Council Chair John Moon, and the Council's Medals Selection Committee, which has worked long and hard to be where we are today. I'd now like to introduce the Dean of the Harvard Kenneth C. Griffin Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, Emma Dench, the McLean Professor of Ancient and Modern History and of the Classics, who will offer a brief welcome before the presentation of the medals. Emma?
Thank you so much, David, and I'd like to echo David's warm welcome to our distinguished medalists and guests and to alumni, family and friends watching the live stream. I too would like to thank our Centennial Medal Selection Committee, very ably chaired by David. Their thoughtful and diligent work enables us to recognize the extraordinary alumni we celebrate today. Our Centennial Medals embody the inquiry, innovation, and impact that emerged from their graduate education, and we are honored to recognize their outstanding contributions to knowledge, to society, and to our understanding of the world and our humanity. I'll now turn things back to David and members of the selection committee to continue the program as we hear more about the significant and transformative achievements of the individual Centennial Medalists. Enjoy. Thank you.
I'd like now to invite Sandy Moose to come forward and present the first medal.
Thank you, David. I'm honored to be reading the Centennial Medal citation for Anjana Rao. To confront some of the most daunting and prevalent problems in human health, from neurodegenerative disease to immune disorders to cancer, we need to map out the complex, invisible mechanisms that govern how our cells and genes actually work. fortunately for us, Anjana Rao has been adeptly solving these mysteries for decades, unlocking vast new knowledge in human cell biology and opening doors to potentially transformative therapies. Rao was born in Washington, D.C., and grew up in India, where she earned bachelor's and master's degrees at Osmania University. She completed her PhD in biophysics at Harvard in 1978 and postdoctoral fellowship in immunology at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in 1981 before becoming a professor of pathology at Harvard Medical School, where she was a member of the faculty for 30 years. Today, Rao is the Pfizer Endowed Chair in Cancer Immunology and Oncology at the La Jolla Institute for Immunology, which she joined in 2010 to establish the Division of Signaling and Gene Expression. She also serves as an adjunct professor in the Department of Pharmacology at the University of California, San Diego, and she's an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Rao is astonishingly productive and influential in her work. She began her career by investigating how genes are turned on in T cells, which is a type of white blood cell that is crucial to our immune system. Over time, she has achieved numerous field-opening breakthroughs again and again across cell biology, immunology, and epigenetics. Multiple times, she has appeared on the Claritz highly cited researchers list, which identifies scientists who produce multiple papers ranking in the top 1% of their field in year of publication in terms of citations. Anjana is a brilliant and very deep thinker, says Tim Springer, Latham Family Professor of Biological Chemistry and Molecular Pharmacology. She often goes into new areas by taking a fresh approach, and she is drawn to very important fundamental questions. As a result, she has had an impact in divergent areas, ranging from signaling pathways in T cells to epigenetic chromosome modifications to metabolic regulation. She knows the broad strokes of each field, but she's also very detail-oriented. Arlene Sharp, the Colocatrones University professor and chair of the Department of Immunology at Harvard Medical School, was an undergraduate when she first met Rao. Anjana is an incredible scientist, says Sharp. Her fundamental work is so far-reaching, and her breakthrough discoveries have opened avenues for a variety of therapies. Some of her most recent work has been on how cancer cells evade the immune system, and her work in that area has the potential to lead to new cancer immunotherapies. Sharp adds, Anjana is a wonderfully rigorous scientist committed to answering fundamental scientific questions at a very deep level. She has been an incredible mentor who has trained a huge cohort of highly successful scientists in academia and industry. One of those scientists is William Pastor, PhD in 2011, a student co-author on one of Rao's most highly cited papers in 2009, and now a faculty member at McGill University. It wasn't until I completed my PhD that I realized how rare scientists like Anjana are, Pastor says. Most scientists try to become expert in a narrow field and confine their research to that area. Anjana just studied whatever she found interesting using the best tools at her disposal. Her lab has had an unusual record of making foundational discoveries in different areas. More than anything else, I think this is due to Anjana's exceptional intellectual scope and curiosity. Pastor adds she was an inspiring mentor. She led by example. She worked harder than anyone else did in her lab, and she motivated people by showing continued excitement for their projects and also a great deal of faith in her students. According to Mark Ansel, a former postdoc in Rao's lab and now a professor at the University of California, San Francisco, Anjana solves riddles. things that have puzzled scientists for a while. She has opened up whole new fields multiple times during her career because she has the intuition to figure out those long-standing riddles. She can pull together the right teams to come up with the solutions, to understand how our bodies really work, and she has an experimental fearlessness. She always shares her ideas, always shares the latest data, and plows ahead, always to the betterment of science. Anja, please come up here for your award.
Anjana Rao, for solving some of the most challenging fundamental mysteries in human cell biology and for opening new fields of inquiry and new therapeutic pathways in so many promising directions. We are proud to award you the 2026 Centennial Medal.
Thank you. That was an endorsement that was very good. So I'm really honored to be a recipient of this medal. And I think that biology is what really deserves it, because there are so many problems in biology and so many unsolved problems that will still have a bearing on human health. So I was at Harvard for more than 30 years, as you were told, after I graduated. And I had the good fortune to meet a lot of very clever people who were tackling all aspects of biology, making advances that I had not, and nobody could have anticipated. And really, it's scarcely possible to convey how much knowledge was gained during the years that I was a graduate student and until I left Harvard and well beyond. Recombinant DNA research, of course, was in its heyday while I was in my first years as a graduate student. And the cloning of the human genome followed within less than 25 years. That made a remarkable number of things possible. It allowed us to look at diseases from a new perspective. It became possible to infer diseases from small numbers of affected patients in a very small number of families. It also became possible to look at the sequences of model organisms, fruit flies and mice and so on, and to say how these things, these genomes, if compared over evolution, could really tell us about the variation that occurs, that natural selection acts upon. So basically, disease-causing mutations and complex, completely new syndromes in children and in adults and in cancer and autoimmunity have been solved. And sometimes the treatments have been found to be extremely simple. Children have been fed with magnesium, for instance, or with amino acids, or with vitamins that they were lacking, and they've been completely cured. And I think that is one of the most remarkable things about biology, the understanding of biology. Sort of getting away from quack therapies and trying to understand what the basis of a disease is. And many, many people have done this. So my particular interest at the moment is the dark matter of the genome. This is something that was discovered originally by Barbara McClintock and Mays. And it's really responsible for an unusually large amount of pathology in humans. These range from predisposition to cancer, as probably all of you know, And they also range in a syndrome called clonal hematopoiesis, which everybody has as they age, to inflammation and autoimmunity and even cardiovascular diseases. A remarkable half of the genome can be thought of as prisons that imprison a lot of bad actors in the genome. As we age, those prisons become leaky, and these bad actors become expressed. And what we know about what the bad actors do is quite limited, actually, by technology, which I'm sure will advance in the next few years. The complete sequence of these prisons, because they're very repetitive, has only become possible in the last 10 years or so through a remarkable consortium envisioned by a very young woman called Karen Meager, who just decided to sequence the genome from telomere to telomere, including all these repetitive regions. So suddenly it's now possible to locate these villains in the genome and to see how they escape in different pathologies. I'm confident that those technological improvements are underway and will emerge for general use, general scientific use, very soon. So some of the mysteries of the brain are being tackled as well, including neurodevelopmental syndromes in children and some of the major problems of mental health and addiction. These are going to take a little longer, but they are coming. And the dark genome will encapsulate some of the pathologies that are happening at this time. Less understood, of course, are things like sleep, or even jet lag, or language, or consciousness, of course, where the role of the genome is not going to be as easily understood. But the things that make scientists despair is if you're simply interested in understanding and acquiring knowledge, why do we put up with so much waste? There are many traits in humans that seem to interfere with the progress of knowledge and seem to be common to humans as a whole. An inbuilt tribalism, for instance, a distrust of strangers, a strong tendency to aggression instead of cooperation, and plain old acquisitiveness and greed. And I think these traits have been acquired over millennia because they were adaptive during evolution. And you can see that in animal societies, bird societies, everything. So it's not clear that academics will ever be able to solve these problems. But a scientific understanding of how aggression works in model organisms and why birds of a feather flock together, as everyone says, may provide clues that will benefit society as a whole. So that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
So the next Centennial Medalist is Christian Samper. Christian Samper is a tireless champion of the environment and a gifted leader of some of the world's top organizations that celebrate and protect it. A renowned conservation biologist, a pioneer in some of the earliest efforts to address climate change on a global scale, and an innovative director of world-leading institutions like the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History and the Wildlife Conservation Society, Samper has been extraordinarily effective in bringing people together to serve the best interests of our planet. Samper was born in Costa Rica and grew up in Colombia, where he developed a lifelong fascination with nature and tropical ecology. He studied at the Universidad de los Andes in Bogota and first came to Harvard in 1985 as a visiting undergraduate, taking biology classes with the legendary Stephen Jay Gould and E.O. Wilson. Samper went on to pursue graduate studies at Harvard in organismic and evolutionary biology with a dissertation on tropical forest ecology, which he completed in 1992. Samper's research on the evolutionary ecology and biodiversity of Andean cloud forests, focusing on species relationships and conservation, provided an ideal foundation for what would become a lifetime of climate advocacy work. Shortly after graduating from Harvard, he returned to his home country of Colombia to help create the National Ministry of the Environment and became founding director of Colombia's Alexander von Humboldt Biodiversity Institute. On the international stage, he chaired the science advisory body of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity and launched the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which analyzed the impact of human actions on ecosystems worldwide. Building on his consequential early leadership of efforts to protect biodiversity and fight climate change, Samper went on to lead a number of the world's highest profile environmental organizations and institutions. He served as deputy director of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama, as director of the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., and for a year as acting secretary of the entire Smithsonian Institution, the world's largest museum, education, and research complex. Samper then became president and CEO of the Wildlife Conservation Society, which manages the world's largest network of urban wildlife parks anchored by the Bronx Zoo, along with long-term research and field conservation programs in more than 60 countries around the world. Since 2022, Samper has served as managing director and leader for nature solutions at the Bezos Earth Fund, where he helped shape the impact of the largest ever philanthropic commitment to fight climate change and protect and restore the natural world. He is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, where he's been a member of the Public Face of Science Project, a multi-year initiative exploring the evolving relationship between scientists and the public, and where he currently serves as chair of the Scientific, Cultural, and Nonprofit Leadership Section panel. Don Feaster, Asa Gray Research Professor of Systematic Botany and former director of the Harvard University Herbaria, observes, Christian has promoted biodiversity and conservation in each of his leadership positions. His goal has been to make the world a safer place for organisms, and he's done that quite well. He has always been a great proponent of natural history collections, of nature, and of conservation. Indeed, Samper has spearheaded many ambitious projects over the course of his career. One such project was the Encyclopedia of Life, an undertaking inspired by E.O. Wilson, who proposed creating a comprehensive online portal with information about all living organisms on Earth. Samper played a leading role in establishing this resource, which lives on today through the Biodiversity Heritage Library, providing digital access to critical resources previously available only in print. James Hankin, professor of biology emeritus and former director of Harvard's Museum of Comparative Zoology, has said, Christian is interested in championing biodiversity and bringing biodiversity to the masses. The Biodiversity Heritage Library has helped expedite further discovery and has been a godsend to scientists in every corner of the world. And ultimately, it was Christian who made it succeed. He makes policy decisions, he launches initiatives, and because he's also a trained scientist and biologist, everyone is confident in his leadership. Samper's leadership has also extended to Harvard. He served on the university's governing boards as an overseer from 2009 to 2015 and chaired the Overseers Committee on Science and Engineering, working closely with then Provost Alan Garber, now president of Harvard University. Garber has said, quote, "Christian is an exemplary university citizen. He deserves a great deal of credit for his role in spurring the university-wide review of the life sciences, an ambitious undertaking that led to consequential advances in one of Harvard's most prominent areas of research and teaching. Christian is endlessly curious, tenacious, and unfailingly diplomatic, and also a powerful, and a powerful advocate for the environment and for institutions that contribute to knowledge and its dissemination worldwide." So with these words from our university president, I'd like to call Christian forward to please accept your award.
Christian Samper, for your superlative leadership of some of the world's finest institutions for natural history, conservation, and ecology, and for your lifelong commitment to leveraging the best of science and policy to fight climate change and safeguard biodiversity. We are proud to award you the 2026 Centennial Medal.
Thank you very much for this tremendous honor, and thank you all, including many friends and former faculty that taught me many years ago, for being here with me. I'm very proud. My affiliation with Harvard spans more than 40 years, and it's had 4 different main chapters. You heard some of them a moment ago. First as a visiting undergraduate back in 1985, then as a graduate student getting my master's and PhD. A few years later, they called me back into service as a member of the Board of Overseers, where I worked with Mark Goodhart and Alan Garber and others. And now, and very importantly, as the proud father of a student at Harvard College who's here with us today. I remember when I first came here back in 1985. It was the first time I'd left Columbia to study here. As you heard, I grew up as the son of a Colombian mother and Colombian father, studying at the Universidad de los Andes. And there was this incredible opportunity created by a former Colombian member of the Board of Overseers called Mauricio Obregón, who created an exchange program. So a student from Los Andes could come here, and a student from Harvard could go to Los Andes. And I was the first recipient of that. And I remember arriving here without knowing anyone, being embraced by a woman called Lily Wadsworth, who was in the Center for Latin American and Iberian Studies, who looked after me, helped me find a place to live, enroll in classes. And then suddenly I found myself overnight studying with the people that had written the textbooks that I was reading back at my university. People like Ernst Mayr, people like Ed Wilson, Stephen Jay Gould, and many others. And that's where I took biology of plants with Don Feaster, who's here in the audience today, a long time ago. I came back a few years later for my PhD. And those of you who have suffered and had the pleasure of doing this, remember the qualifying exam, which you do, and you're given a master's as a consolation prize halfway through. And one of the legendary things that we had as graduate students was there was this notebook, which I don't know if it still exists, where you'd write the questions. And you'd pass it on from generation to generation, so you'd know a little bit about this. And one of the questions that was legendary was done by Richard Evans Schultes, who was a famous ethnobotanist, who was professor here for many years, who did a lot of work in Colombia. Many people consider him the founder of the field of ethnobotany. And he had a classic question that I want you all to remember when we go in for lunch. And he said, "So, Don, what did you have for breakfast today?" I said, "Well, cup of coffee." He said, "Oh, coffee. What's the scientific name of coffee? What's the family of coffee? What's the Rubiaceae family? Where was it domesticated? What's the gene pattern, et cetera?" He'd do the entire qualifying exam on that. A friend of mine, when he took that, got the same question and said, "So what'd you have for breakfast?" He said, "Glass of water, sir." So think about it as you think you have lunch today. Anyway, I was fortunate to have an incredible cohort of students, not only great faculty, but great peer students. And the interesting thing is that many of us from all over the world were really interested in environmental issues. And at that time, to be candid, we were discouraged from pursuing things beyond academia and the classic study and looking at environmental issues. It was not easy to enroll in classes in other schools beyond arts and sciences, where we could actually learn a few other tricks. And what's interesting is, fast forward and 30 years later, many of my peers are some of the leading people on environmental issues in the world. The person that led the climate work in Brazil, Carlos Kling, Adriano Moreira at the Global Environment Facility, René Gonzalez, who runs the Protected Area System in Mexico, many other. We were all students of the organismic and evolutionary biology. As you heard, I went back to Colombia back in 1992, which happened to be the year of the Earth Summit. If you remember, the United Nations, for the first time, the world leaders came together in Rio 1992 and said, "We have a problem. We're suddenly eroding, we're destroying biodiversity, we've got problems with climate change. It's time the world comes together to do something and think about a new model of sustainable development." And I happened to return to Colombia at that point as a newly minted Harvard PhD and found myself thrust upon creating the Ministry of the Environment of Colombia, creating the National Biodiversity Institute, and advocating for the importance of science to inform policy. Anyway, it's been a journey that, as you heard, took me from there to the Smithsonian, where I was there for 12 years. I had the privilege of running the Natural History Museum with Diana Munn, who's here with me, who's my right hand, and to oversee the largest natural history collection in the world. And I do want to take a moment just to say that one of the great things that Harvard has is the collections in natural history and culture. Because these collections offer us a window into the past, allow us to ask questions today and to inform the future. And now we can, the tools that we have extraordinary moments to look back and relook at them. And I do hope that Harvard will treasure them, look after them, and really put this at the service of Harvard and humanity. And of course, as someone that worked at the Smithsonian for many years, when the centennial of the Natural Museum of Natural History was coming, I was wondering, what could we do that would be an iconic project that would help define who we are? And we decided to build the Hall of Human Origins with Rick Potts and other people to really figure out, what is our human history? And I know we have historians here today. So in evolutionary biology, we take a slightly deeper perspective at history, going back thousands or millions of years. And we were really asking a question about, what is the human journey? How did we get here as a species? What is the impact and the relationship? We were really about understanding the natural world and our place in it. And what I learned from all that journey is that, of course, our own history as a species goes back 200,000 years ago out of Africa. But most people don't realize that we're just at one branch of that evolutionary tree of hominins that's had more than 20 different species of hominins. And even 50,000 years ago, there were 4 species roaming the planet. We happen to be that one branch that arrived in the Americas 20,000 years ago or so. We then, of course, with the advent of agriculture, the Industrial Revolution, are expanded dramatically and have had a profound impact on the planet. We now have 8 billion people. We have tremendous progress in many areas, but we've also had a huge impact on the environment. As a matter of fact, we estimate we've lost about 70% of the terrestrial ecosystems of the planet. So it is a real wake-up call for us today, and ask ourselves, what is the responsibility that we have, not only to ourselves, but to the some 10 million species that we share the planet with. And that is what I've been doing over the years and what I'm doing today. I'm incredibly privileged to work with a great set of colleagues, including Kelly Levin, who's here in the audience today at the Bezos Earth Fund, and this remarkable opportunity we were handed 4 years ago to help invest $10 billion to help some of the world's biggest problems and two of the biggest challenges, the loss of biodiversity and solving climate change. We're busy working at it, but the good news is we've never had more tools at our disposal. We've never had more information, and we know what the solutions are. We can protect what we have left, that 30% of the planet we have left. We can transform the way we look at our food systems, our energy systems. We can restore so much of the planet, and we can really build a much better future for us and for all life on Earth. And everything I've done up to now has been the incredible privilege of learning. I've always sometimes said a scientist is a child that never really grows up. We're always asking questions. But it's really about continuously working with others and getting the best out of them and communicating this to people. And as I look back at my career, I can always thank GSAS for what I learned. And I'll just point out 3 things. First is recognizing the value of science and really going deep and having a deep, solid understanding of the planet, the species, and who we are and everything else around us. And that depth of knowledge is something that I learned as a student here. But I also learned the importance about speaking with other disciplines, whether it's anthropologists or biologists or physicists or others. And one of the privileges when I was on the board of overseers was to look across the university. And I actually even crossed the Charles River and went to the business school, which was something unusual. But I really got to see the power and the scale and the scope of the strength that Harvard has, including the 14 biology departments across the university. That's just something that Alan Garber and I worked on. And the last thing is that we can really need to focus on not only in using science, but using the science to inform policy and to inform decisions to find solutions. Because we have incredible solutions at our fingertips. What we need to do is focus on innovation and solutions and to really be able to bring about the systems change that we need to build a more sustainable future for all of us. And if you think it's not only about us, but really the decisions that we make every day of today, what each one of us does and what we as a society do will literally shape the future of life on Earth. So I feel incredibly privileged to have had a journey that started here 40 years ago. And I feel privileged to continue working on this and now to see my daughter Carolina continuing in some of those areas from an engineering point of view, but still looking at this. And I know that the future will be in much better hands when this next generation, including all these graduates that we're going to celebrate tomorrow, take over and lead us into the future. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I have the privilege and distinct honor of introducing Londa Schiebinger. Londa is the world's leading authority on sex and gender in the history of science. Londa Schiebinger not only pioneered the study of women in science in the 18th century, but also created an international platform that helps modern-day scientists use insights and methodologies from the humanities to innovate and improve the practice of scientific discovery today. Schiebinger was an English major at the University of Nebraska, which she just mentioned she felt like she escaped from to come to Harvard, and was quite surprised and honored to complete her PhD in history at Harvard in 1984. Her dissertation gave rise to 2 field-defining books. The first, The Mind Has No Sex, Women in the Origins of Modern Science in 1989, and Nature's Body, Gender in the Making of Modern Science in 1993. With these books, Schiebinger brought to light the previously unexplored history of gender bias during the scientific revolution, including, for example, the gender politics behind Linnaeus's choice of the term Malia to describe our biological class. Schiebinger has also examined the circulation and suppression of knowledge through her prize-winning book, Plants and Empire, Colonial Bioprospecting in the Atlantic World in 2004, and Secret Cures of Slaves, People, Plants, and Medicine in the 18th Century Atlantic World in 2017. Londa's historical scholarship has given generations of scientists and students an evidence-based narrative that challenges myths about who belongs in science, says Carrie Nadeau, incoming dean of the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. I see her intellectual legacy in the way we now routinely ask how sex, gender, and other factors shape exposures, vulnerabilities, and technological solutions, and in how we design fair and effective interventions and preventions. Evelyn Hammonds, Barbara Gutman Rosencrantz Professor of the History of Science, hails Schiebinger for her pioneering work in the field. Londa was almost immediately recognized as a leading voice in the study of the history of women in science, Hammond says, and her intersectional analyses of gender and the scientific enterprise have made her an internationally renowned scholar. Her work is deeply researched, methodologically innovative, and always addresses the most important questions about the ways in which scientific knowledge is gendered. She is a great scholar and a generous colleague. For more than 2 decades, Schiebinger has brought this pioneering spirit and innovative energy to her teaching and leadership at Stanford University, where she is John L. Hines Professor of History of Science and Director of Gendered Innovations in Science, Health and Medicine, Engineering, and Environment. This project brings humanities analysis into the sciences, ensuring that considerations of sex, gender, and intersectionality can inform everything from the kind of questions scientists ask, to the way studies are designed, to how technology and therapies are developed, so that scientific work is more rigorous, relevant, and beneficial for everyone. Since 2009, Gendered Innovations has brought over 225 scientists, engineers, social scientists, and humanists together in a series of collaborative workshops to develop concrete methods and case studies that scientists can use directly in their work. These materials are publicly available on the project's website, which has engaged more than 2.5 million unique users across 185 countries. Schiebinger has also been consulted as an expert multiple times by the United Nations, the European Commission, and the National Science Foundation, which have leveraged her work to help shape science policy and to require the integration of gender analysis into scientific research. It is extraordinarily rare for a historian to have this kind of impact on public life that Professor Schiebinger has achieved, says Joyce Chaplin, James Duncan Phillips Professor of Early American History, who describes Schiebinger as a foundational figure in women's and gender studies. Chaplin adds, within the new field of agnotology, a branch of epistemology that investigates ignorance, it was Professor Schiebinger who identified it as not only an absence of knowledge, but often a deliberate suppression of knowledge, resulting from social and political inequalities. Her critical voice on gender, STEM, inclusion, and willed ignorance is a crucial one. Schiebinger has mentored and inspired many eminent scholars, including Sarah Richardson, Aramont Professor of the History of Science and Studies of Women, Gender, and Sexuality, who describes Schiebinger as a cherished mentor of mine. Londa is the leading scholar on women and gender in the history of science, and she has built a truly global conversation around gender bias in scientific knowledge that has driven policy change. Richardson observes, she unites the humanities, social sciences, and sciences through a truly unique skill set that she developed through iteration, trial and error, and experimentation. And she does it with aplomb. Thank you, and please join us to receive your medal.
Londa Schiebinger, for your path-breaking scholarship on the history of sex and gender during the scientific revolution, and for your visionary leadership of gendered innovations, which so powerfully leverages expertise in the humanities to improve the practice of science. We are proud to award you the 2026 Centennial Medal.
Okay, not all of this fits up here exactly. Well, thank you for this lovely award. It's a great honor, and I'm really thrilled to be back in Cambridge. They won't let you in the yard. My Stanford ID got me nowhere, but anyway, it's a privilege to be here. So over the past 40 years, my work has been devoted to teasing apart three analytically distinct but interlocking pieces of the gender and science puzzle. One is the history of women's participation in science. Second is the gender in the structure of scientific institutions, like Harvard, like Stanford. And third, the gendering of human knowledge, which is my basic interest. My first book, and also my dissertation, The Mind Has No Sex, ? Was written at a time when it was imperative to expose the privileged firstborn twins of modern science, the myth of value-neutral science, and the myth of the natural body. The claim of science to be objective was and remains the linchpin holding together a system that rendered women's exclusion invisible and made women's exclusion appear just and natural. So my work over the past 40 years has been devoted to dismantling this self-reinforcing cultural system. I came to Harvard in 1978, and it was a very different place. While today I think Harvard's history department must match Stanford's in having more than 40% tenured women, when I studied at Harvard in the late 70s and early 80s, it was a world without women among the professorship. And I think we were only about 25% in the graduate school. So in the late 70s, there was exactly one tenured woman on the history faculty, and she was a historian of the Middle East, and I, as a European intellectual historian, meant that our paths never crossed. One day, I observed her apply lipstick in what was then called the ladies' room, and no words were spoken. So needless to say, in this world without women professors, no women's history was taught, and gender history was but a twinkle in the collective academic eye. A Fulbright, which took me to Berlin, was the starting point of my study of women and gender. Being away from Harvard gave me permission to consider new things. I wrote and published an article that year, came back and handed it to my advisor, who read it and asked, "What part of this is history?" That was a remark intended to be highly dismissive. "The historical part," I declared, turned on my heels and disappeared into Widener Library, which is fabulous for historians. I emerged 4 years later with a dissertation that my committee found shockingly good and, shall we say, historical. So the wonderful part of my life at Harvard was not the professors, it was my fellow graduate students. They were so important, and I learned so much from them. Importantly, among the graduate students was my husband, the well-known historian of science, Robert Proctor. We met at Winthrop House. This house system is absolutely marvelous. We were both graduate tutors. We had a fabulous year, and Robert and I then traveled together as Fulbright students. And we've been traveling together as professors ever since. In a sense, we were a pioneering dual career academic couple. And after we were ensconced at Stanford, I wrote a book about dual career academic couples and why it's in the interest of universities to hire them. So I was hired at Stanford in
2004 to direct the Institute for Gender Research. Gender research at this time had deep roots in the humanities and social sciences, but Stanford wanted it expanded over all 7 of its schools. So that was really easy for medicine. Sex differences in heart disease, in osteoporosis, in chronic pain were already widely recognized, but it was very interesting to work with the engineers and the computer scientists. Now, if I hadn't been born in the 1950s, born a woman, I think I would have been an engineer. I absolutely adore what they do. So much of the gender research on science and engineering in this era was critical. Gender scholars, myself included, were experts in pointing out bias in science and technology. It had to be uncovered. It had to be documented. Since the 2000s, I'd been invited more and more to speak to large groups of scientists who wanted to increase the number of women among them. And finally, I found myself in front of 200 astronomers at the University of Chicago, and I could see that a new approach was needed. We needed new ways to bring in the STEM professors into our fold, to make them colleagues and collaborators. And gendered innovations was it. In 2005, I coined that term and launched the project. And we have now worked with many engineers and natural sciences in workshops across Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia to develop our materials. Gendered institutes have been founded in Japan and Korea. So I've always had 2 intellectual lives. As an 18th century historian of Europe and the Atlantic world, I show how knowledge came to be. But with gendered innovations, I seek to use those same analytical tools to shape the future of knowledge. So for example, including sex analysis in marine science, that is to say the different behaviors and needs of male and female organisms, will help policymakers better place marine protected areas. If we ignore these differences, well-meaning policymakers will probably protect only one sex. If both males and females are not properly protected, there could be population collapse. So gendered innovations has taken me all over the world. I guess I've become a policy wonk, which is not a pretty word in my circles, but is crucial to getting things done. And I've had the great privilege, for example, of working with the European Commission to develop gender policy. We spent maybe 3 hours one night at dinner, 4 of us developed their one-sentence policy, which was their first policy on including gender analysis in grant proposals, so we could see how that worked for everyone across the whole of society. I've also helped develop guidelines for peer-reviewed journals such as Nature, Cell, The Lancet, and so on and so forth. It's been an absolute pleasure cultivating this work. And really, it all started at Harvard, and for that, I remain extremely grateful. So thank you for the great education, and thank you for this wonderful award.
Good afternoon. I'm Maury Piper. I'm the Vice Chair of the Medals Committee. It is my great honor and pleasure to read the citation of our 4th Centennial Medalist, Frank Bedard. William Butler Yeats once said, "We make rhetoric out of our quarrels with others. Out of our quarrels with ourselves, we make poetry." Through a lifetime of wrestling with some of the deepest and keenest aspects of human experience, Frank Bedard has created poetry that speaks to us with singular energy and urgency. A great lover of art in all its forms, a towering intellect, a devoted teacher and mentor to his students, and a generous guide on the path for fellow poets, Bedard is an artist of rare insight, empathy, and eloquence. Bedard was born in Bakersfield, California, the only child of parents who divorced when he was 5. He studied poetry as an undergraduate at the University of California, Riverside, then came to Harvard, earning his master's in English in 1967. 1 year earlier, he had met Robert Lowell, initially the subject of Bedard's graduate research and ultimately a close friend and confidant, with Bedard advising Lowell on his last 4 books and editing Lowell's collected poems. Bedard himself is the author of 11 celebrated books of poetry, including Golden State in 1973, Desire in 1997, Stardust in 2005, Metaphysical Dog in 2013, and Half-Light, Collected Poems 1965 to 2016, which won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. His latest collection, Against Silence, was published in 2021. For more than 45 years, Bedard was a professor at Wellesley College, where he taught poetry workshops, as well as courses on modern and contemporary poetry. The poet Dan Chasen, PhD 2002, now a professor of English at Wellesley, audited Bedard's classes as a graduate student and ended up exchanging work with him in what Chasen describes as a wonderful apprenticeship. I was impressed to meet a hero of mine. I was also impressed to see what a kind and compassionate teacher he was, Chasen says. Reflecting on Bedard's poetic legacy, Chasen remarks, simply put, Frank changed the game. He started out as part of a generation of post-confessional poets after Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, and Robert Lowell. In his early work, Frank set out to explore the limits and fringe of human psychology, which was shocking and startling and quite amazing to do. Then he began to write poetry that was exploring his own psyche, particularly questions around his coming out rather late in life. Those poems are very personal on the one hand, but also impressively philosophical and theoretical. He's always been uncompromising and unafraid in exploring the experience of having a body that has its own wishes and desires that you can't entirely control. The outcome is a body of work unrivaled in the last 50 years in terms of the variety and power of his short lyrics and the range and extension of his long poems, Chasen adds. I've always looked forward to the latest Bedard book as a kind of clarification of life, what Matthew Arnold says poetry should be. You're just waiting for that deep insight, that powerful sense of beauty, and the dignity that he brings to people in love, people in grief. Stephanie Burt, Donald P. and Catherine B. Locher, professor of English, praises the vivid distinctiveness of Bedard's work, including, as Burt puts it, disquisitions on the history of philosophy in spiky free verse full of capital letters, italics, white space, and unconventional punctuation. Bedard's extreme typography helped him convey extreme states of mind, Burt observes. It also helps show how his lines ought to sound read aloud. Bedard writes through passion, but also through subtraction, leaving out all but the statements that seem essential to the soul, the desire, the wisdom, or the memory at hand. The results, however austere, can be revelations. His poems are doors best opened with cautious attention. Behind them, you might even see yourself. Peter Sachs, John P. Marquand Professor of English Emeritus, describes Bedard as irresistible, charming, excruciated, and rightly beloved. So too his poems, which early to late have given uncanny embodiment to some of the most extreme, yet somehow symptomatic and revelatory voices of our time, Sachs says. He is the extreme heir of the modernist dramatic monologue, and surely one of the most daring and precisely agonized lyric poets of his generation. I doubt any poet has worked and reworked his lines as ferociously or beautifully, as fanatically in the Yeatsian sense, as Frank, Sachs adds. Frank has also, of course, been a legendary teacher, mentor, and friend, no small radiance for someone who has also been a truly devoted recluse. I'd guess that Frank burned more spirit fuel in an hour than most people ignite in a lifetime. For all the agony, he is a great poet of desire, of love, of gem-like, hard-wrought beauty. Professor Bedard.
Frank Bidart for giving voice to some of the deepest, most difficult aspects of what it means to be human through your arresting, awe-inspiring poetry, and for the generous and generative support that you have provided to so many students and poets. We are proud to award you the 2026 Centennial Medal.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. Harvard in the 60s was a very thrilling place. Robert Lowell came here. He brought Elizabeth Bishop, and Harvard was full of people who were interested in many arts. The person I had studied with at Riverside was Thomas R. Edwards, who was a great teacher, and he had studied with Reuben Brower at Harvard. And Reuben Brower ran Hum 6, which was a course that many, many undergraduates took, and it taught them how to read a poem. The whole idea was to pay attention to tone of voice. And I really learned to read under Tom Edwards and Reuben Brower. And I have to be eternally grateful for that. I mean, that was an experience that became absolutely fundamental to everything I've done, and certainly everything I've written. Getting to know Lowell was also a great experience. He was an utterly remarkable person. Helen Vendler, who taught at Harvard, also knew him very well, and the whole world seemed bigger when Lowell was around, and when Lowell talked about the world. So I feel tremendously lucky to have come to Harvard at that time. And Lowell was famous for so-called confessional poetry, which was not a term he liked and I didn't ever like, but it simply meant poems that dealt with family, with experience that was often not grand, but very immediate, familial, and that has been crucial to everything I've done. One was incredibly lucky to have a great artist, and then another great artist in the presence of Elizabeth Bishop at Harvard to study with, to learn from, to experience as a human being. I want to simply read one poem today, and it suggests something about poems not being about another world, but about a very immediate world that all of us have to experience. It's a short poem. Its title is Romain Cleroux, and the title is the name of my mother's doctor. Romain Cleroux. When I asked if she was in pain, he said no, but that she had in her final minutes showed that panic he had often seen the faces of the dying show, facing the void. He said this matter-of-factly, as if because he was a doctor, his experience mattered, as if he had known her and her son long enough not to varnish or lie. They had gone to high school together, and now because he had become a doctor and then become her doctor, he watched Martha face the void. 28 years later, I can hear the way he said, Martha. His name was Cleroux, Dr. Romain Cleroux. Thank you.
Please join me in congratulating the 4 medalists and in thanking them for all the ways they've pushed the boundaries of knowledge and shaped our understanding of our world.